The moment I opened the cabin door, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the silence that tipped me off. Snow had blanketed the mountain in a deep hush. But the fact that I was missing. No boots by the door. No photo of us on the mantel. The leather chair I picked out, the one that made the cabin feel like home, had been replaced by something bland, like I had never been there at all. I walked deeper inside, unease crawling through me. That's when I found it. In the office drawer, a file labeled simply, Property. I opened it with trembling hands and felt my stomach turn. Every document had been reprinted, reorganized, renamed. My name, the one that had been on every original paper, was gone. When I confronted her family, her father barely looked up from his coffee. "We just made a few updates," he said casually, as if erasing me from my own home was no different than taking out the trash. She sat beside him, her smile as sweet and placid as ever, but I could see the venom coiled just beneath it. "It's still family land," she told me. The betrayal was so sharp, I could feel it cutting inside my chest. I walked out before my anger boiled over, drove 4 hours down that icy mountain in a freezing car with no heat, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. That night I didn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment, every word, every smile that wasn't really a smile. I thought about the cabin, about the years I had spent bringing it back to life. And I realized something. They hadn't just stolen wood and stone. They had stolen me, but they underestimated the wrong person. Because 3 years earlier, when I signed that deed, I had also signed the beginning of their downfall. 3 years earlier, the cabin was nothing more than a crumbling log shell on forgotten land. Most people would have walked away from it, but not me. I saw what it could be. A sanctuary, a place to escape the noise of the world. She saw something else. A dream, a story to tell friends. She called it our project, our shared adventure. Weekends became a routine of hauling lumber, rewiring the walls, and laying down new floors. I blistered my hands on nails and splinters, but every scar felt worth it when she laughed barefoot on the porch steps, hair wild in the mountain wind, saying she'd never felt more at peace. Her parents weren't impressed then. They called the cabin too remote, too inconvenient. They shook their heads at the hours we poured into it. But the moment it was finished, their opinions shifted like snow melting in spring. Suddenly, the too remote cabin became their perfect retirement spot. Suddenly, it was family property, not because they lifted a finger, but because they wanted what I had built. The change in her was slower, almost invisible at first. She stopped coming up on weekends, claiming work was too demanding. Then came the so-called girls' nights, the ones that never made it onto her calendar. And then, little clues appeared. Charges at hardware stores near the cabin, paint, lumber, locks. Things she never told me about. When I asked, she brushed it off with a casual, "You said it needed updating." Except I hadn't. The moment that broke me came late one night. Her phone lit up on the table. A preview of a message from her father. "Everything's in motion. He won't notice." She never saw me read it. I didn't confront her then. The time for shouting was already over. I just leaned down, kissed her forehead as if nothing had changed, and told her to get some sleep. But I didn't sleep. From that moment I started planning. Once I saw that message, I knew this wasn't carelessness. It was a plan. A conspiracy happening right under my nose. I hired someone, quiet, reliable, a man who asked no questions and delivered only results. Within weeks, he came back with photos. Her parents unloading furniture, ripping out fixtures I had installed, even replacing the nameplate at the driveway. I looked at the images and then at the new documents she had filed at the clerk's office. It hit me all at once. They weren't just taking the cabin. They were meticulously scrubbing me from existence, trying to erase the fact I had ever been there at all. Every record, every tie, every proof of ownership, they wanted it all gone. And the worst part? She didn't even hide it. She smiled at me in the mornings, kissed me goodnight, laughed like nothing was happening. That smile wasn't love anymore. It was victory. But history doesn't vanish so easily. Not when the original deed carried my signature. Not when it was notarized in 3 states. Not when I kept a copy in a safe that no one else even knew existed. I labeled everything, timestamped every file, collected every photograph. My pain sharpened me into something dangerous. I was no longer a husband grieving the loss of trust. I was an archivist of truth, building a weapon made of facts and signatures. And while they were busy congratulating themselves, I waited. Because revenge doesn't always come with shouting matches or broken plates. Sometimes it comes in silence, in careful patience, in letting the enemy walk confidently into their own trap. Her family thought I was sentimental. They thought I would beg or cry. What they didn't realize was that I was methodical. And once I was ready, every single piece of their scheme would collapse under the weight of their own lies. First, the weight of it nearly crushed me. I sat in that office night after night, surrounded by piles of documents, wondering if I was insane. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just paperwork. Maybe she still loved me. But the truth always whispered back. She knew. I started sleeping in the office. She thought I was angry, but anger would have been easier. I was hollow, powerless. I stared at the walls of the cabin in my memory, every nail I had hammered, every wire I had strung, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. Who was I without this place? Who was I without her? Was I a fool who built his own prison one plank at a time? Doubt ate at me. I questioned everything, every laugh we shared, every promise she made. Did she ever mean them? Or were they just words to keep me busy while her family sharpened their knives? And yet, beneath the despair, something flickered, a stubborn spark that refused to die. Pain is a crucible. It asks whether you will shatter under the pressure, or if the broken pieces of who you were can be forged into a blade. I didn't know the answer yet. All I knew was that no one believed me. If I screamed, they'd call me bitter. If I fought openly, they'd call me crazy. And maybe, in their eyes, I already was. Some nights I paced the house like a prisoner, the floorboards groaning under each step. The photos on the wall stared back at me, mocking me with smiles that already felt like lies. I imagined them together, her parents sipping wine, whispering about how naive I was, her laughing softly at my expense. He won't notice. He never notices. That line burned through my skull like fire. I'd close my eyes and ask myself, was I just a laborer? Was I only ever the hands that built their dream? And each time, silence was the only answer. But in the silence of those nights, I realized something. Being invisible could also mean being underestimated. And there is power in that. I wasn't powerless. Not yet. I just needed to stop thinking like a husband and start thinking like a survivor. And when survivors fight back, they don't fight fair. The first crack in their perfect little scheme came quietly. It started with a simple tip. Anonymous. Just enough to raise interest. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. A routine audit flagged the discrepancies in their paperwork. Dates that didn't match, signatures that were too clean, a trail that looked more like forgery than oversight. Suddenly, their updates weren't updates anymore. They were evidence. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest spark of hope. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. The paper trail was talking for me. And then I struck harder. I mailed the full file, every photo, every timestamp, every original deed, to the one person they had never seen coming, her aunt, a retired real estate lawyer, a woman who despised her brother, my wife's father. After a bitter inheritance dispute years ago, left her with nothing but a grudge. When she received the file, she went nuclear. She filed complaints, launched inquiries, demanded hearings. And because of her reputation, doors opened. Investigations began. My name was no longer erased. It was screaming from the pages of frozen legal records. For the first time, I breathed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine walking back into that cabin, sitting in my chair, and feeling whole again. But just as quickly as hope arrived, reality followed. She knew I was behind it. My wife. She didn't confront me directly. She didn't need to. The way she looked at me across the room was enough. Cold, detached, as if she already knew the war wasn't over, and she had more weapons waiting. Because while I had frozen the title, they still lived in the cabin. They still drank coffee on the porch I built, while I sat alone in silence. It was a small victory, but it wasn't enough. And I knew the biggest blow was still coming. The blow didn't come like thunder. It came like snow, quiet, steady, burying me until I couldn't breathe. The investigations dragged on, but her family didn't falter. They doubled down. Every weekend, they posted photos at the cabin, laughing on the porch I built, decorating the walls I wired, sipping wine in the chairs I had carried up the mountain with my bare hands. And her? She didn't stop smiling. At dinners, at gatherings, in every social moment, she was radiant, while I sat across from her, invisible. She never acknowledged the audit, the complaints, the frozen title. Instead, she played her part perfectly, as if I were the unstable husband lashing out over nothing. One night, I overheard her on the phone with her mother. "He thinks he's winning," she whispered, soft laughter in her voice. "But he's already lost." That broke something in me. Not anger, not rage, just emptiness. Even outside the cabin, I could feel the weight of their victory. The world began to shrink. Friends stopped calling, their silence a verdict in itself. In town, conversations would die when I approached, leaving me to walk past the whispers. I'd see her parents laughing with the cashier at the grocery store, their cheerfulness a performance for my benefit, while I felt like a ghost haunting the aisles. My coworkers stopped inviting me out. I could feel their pity, their whispered doubts. No one wanted to pick a side, and silence always favors the liar. The worst part wasn't losing the cabin, it was losing her. Or maybe realizing she was never mine to begin with. Every memory we had built in that place now felt like a weapon turned against me. I couldn't look at a single photograph without tasting betrayal. I sat alone in that office, surrounded by folders, and felt the crushing weight of isolation. For the first time, I wondered if I should just give up, let them have it all, walk away with nothing. Because sometimes the fight doesn't just drain you, it erases you. And in those moments, I almost believed they had succeeded, that I was already gone. Alone in that silence, I finally asked myself the question I had been avoiding. What am I really fighting for? Was it for the cabin itself, the wood, the stone, the roof I built? Or was it for something bigger, something they thought they had stripped from me? My dignity, my name, my place in the story? The answer came slowly, like the dawn creeping over a frozen ridge. I wasn't fighting for walls. I was fighting because they believed they could erase me, and I refused to be erased. I went back to the safe, pulled out the original deed again, held the paper in my hands, felt the weight of the signature that was mine and mine alone. It wasn't just proof, it was a reminder. They had underestimated me because I was quiet, because I never shouted, because I never played their games. But silence doesn't mean surrender. So I sharpened my silence into something else. Strategy. I went back through every file, every timestamp. I built timelines so precise a judge couldn't ignore them. I highlighted every forged transfer, every suspicious edit. Then I copied it all 3 times and sealed it in envelopes labeled with one word: truth. When I was done, I stared at the stacks and felt something shift inside me. No more despair. No more questioning my worth. I had been methodical when I built that cabin. Brick by brick, board by board, weekend after weekend. And now I would rebuild myself the same way. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the part of me they thought they had stolen. And once I reclaimed it, I was going to burn everything they had built on lies. I traced my name on the deed with a shaking finger, remembering the day I signed it. The pen had felt heavy then, but full of promise. She'd smiled, kissed my cheek, told me it was the start of something beautiful. Now that same ink was my weapon. Outside, a storm beat against the windows, but in my office, the only light came from a single desk lamp. I stacked each folder carefully, labeling them truth one after another, until they looked like loaded shells ready for battle. For the first time, the fear was gone. Only resolve remained. The first strike wasn't loud. It was deliberate. I sent another package, this one directly to the county clerk's office. highlighting the discrepancies in her filings. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just cold facts, neatly organized, impossible to ignore. Within a week, the clerk flagged the documents, citing potential fraud. Their clean paperwork suddenly wasn't so clean anymore. That's when I noticed the shift. Her father, usually smug and untouchable, stopped meeting my eyes when I saw him in town. My wife, still my wife on paper, though the word felt hollow, kept glancing at me with something new in her gaze. Not pity, not love, something colder, nervousness. For the first time, they realized I wasn't broken. I wasn't retreating. I was preparing. I grew quieter in public, but more confident in private. I polished my evidence like a blade, cross-referencing every file until there were no cracks they could slip through. I reached out to her aunt again, feeding her updates she could weaponize in court filings. Together, we formed an unspoken alliance. Two people they had underestimated, now moving in tandem. And then came the dinner. I invited them all, her parents, to a quiet steakhouse in the city. Private room. No distractions. I wore the same suit I had worn when I first signed the deed. Petty? Maybe. But every detail mattered now. When they arrived, they were smug. When she showed up late, dramatic as always, they were still confident. They thought I had nothing. I slid the file across the table but kept my hand on it. You seem to have forgotten something in all your updates, I said, my voice perfectly even. My name. It was never removed from the original deed, and now the county clerk is asking why. For the first time, I saw her father's hand tremble. The rebellion had begun, and this time they weren't the ones in control. The dinner wasn't just a confrontation, it was the opening shot. When her father reached for the folder, I didn't let it go. I looked him in the eye and said the words I had been saving for months. You forged records. You filed them under a fake trust. But public records don't lie. And neither does the person I sent them to. He blinked, confused. Who? Your sister, I said. His smugness drained in an instant. Her aunt had already filed motions, sworn affidavits, and delivered deposition testimony that shredded their entire timeline. Judges listened when she spoke. And this time she spoke for me. They sat there stunned as I laid it out. The lawsuit I had filed. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. Every dollar they thought they had secured would now be eaten alive by legal fees. Their pensions, their savings, gone to ash in court. You'll burn through everything you've worked for, I told them, calm as ice. And when the dust settles, I'll still have the cabin, because it was always mine. Her father's jaw clenched. Her mother looked away. And my wife. She stared at me, silent, trembling hands clasped in her lap. Months later, I sat in the back row of the courthouse. Her aunt's deposition had been brutal. She stood before the judge and tore their timeline to pieces, her voice crisp and steady like a blade cutting through paper. When she finished, the judge leaned forward, his voice cold as stone. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to dispossess the rightful owner. The gavel came down like thunder. Their scheme wasn't just exposed, it was condemned. I looked at them then, her father pale, her mother whispering frantically, my wife trembling and unable to meet my eyes. The weight of truth crushed them more effectively than any outburst ever could. I sat in the back row, silent, and let their humiliation wash over me. When I finally walked outside, the winter air hit my lungs like freedom. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I simply watched as the life drained from their faces, as the realization hit that their empire of lies had collapsed. And when I drove back up the mountain, key in hand, the cabin was waiting. My chair was still there, covered by a tarp, untouched. I poured a drink, stood by the window, and watched the snowfall. They tried to erase me. Instead, I erased their future. After the ruling, life didn't return to normal, it never could. But it did become mine again. Her family is still fighting. Last I heard, they were trying to mortgage their house just to cover the mountain of legal fees. Their reputation, once polished and proud, is now scarred with the word fraud. Doors that used to open for them are now shut tight. As for her, she never apologized. She never even tried. In court, she kept her eyes on the floor, hands trembling, but her lips sealed. Maybe she thought silence would save her, the way it once did. But this time, silence wasn't her weapon. It was mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply walked out of the courthouse, breathed in the cold air, and drove back to the cabin. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, it was as if the place had been waiting. My leather chair sat where I left it, hidden under a tarp. The walls I rebuilt still stood strong. The home they tried to take was still mine. And as snow drifted outside, I realized the lesson. You don't always have to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes, silence backed by proof is louder than any argument. They took my trust. They tried to take my time. They even tried to take my home. But in the end, I took everything else. And now, when she says it's still family property, she's right. Because I am the family.